Hello cruel world. My name is Dr. Sohom. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. So today I'm going to talk about Colin Pitchfork. He was born on the 23rd of March 1960. He's a double child rapist and murderer. He's also the very first person that was convicted of a crime based on DNA evidence. He was arrested in September 1987 and was imprisoned for a life sentence in January 1988 with a minimum term of 28 years. And the reason why this case is relevant is because he's been in the news recently because a parole board signed off on his release very recently in June 2021. So in this video, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the background of Pitchfork, including his crimes. I'm going to tell you how he got caught, and I will tell you the factors that the parole board would have considered in agreeing his release. Let's get started. So Pitchfork was married in 1981 to a social worker, no less, and they had 2 sons together. He'd been arrested on quite a few indecent exposure charges in the past. He worked as an apprentice baker, and apparently he was a pretty good baker, but he would keep bothering the women he worked with. He'd keep chatting them up to the point it was affecting his work. So in November 1983 was his first murder, and that was a young 15-year-old girl called Linda Mann. She was babysitting for the evening, and she took a shortcut on the way home, and it seems that Pitchfork found her and committed these horrific acts on her way home. What I think is quite chilling is that his baby son apparently was asleep in the car at the time. She was found the next day. She'd been raped, she'd been strangled, and some semen was obtained from her corpse. Then in July 1986, only a mile away from where that happened, young Dawn Ashworth also went through a very similar horrific experience. So she was at a friend's house, and then on the way home she was accosted by Pitchfork. She was beaten, she was raped, and she was also strangled. What I think is quite interesting about this case is that there was a suspect who was only 17 years old who had learning disabilities who gave false confessions in both of these cases. And had DNA technology not caught up, then it's very likely that he would have wrongly been imprisoned and convicted of these crimes. But DNA technology had just about managed to prove for the first time that this man was innocent, this teenager, and that Colin Pitchfork was guilty. So Pitchfork received a life sentence with a minimum term of 28 years. So people have asked me in the past why people are released if they're on a life sentence. So a life sentence isn't the same as spending all of the rest of your life in prison or dying in prison. A life sentence means you serve a minimum term, which is previously called a tariff, and in this case for Pitchfork it was 28 years. Originally 30 years, then after appeal cut down to 28 years. And then after you're released, you're on parole for life. So you're supervised and observed for life. So that's what the life sentence means. It does not mean life in prison. Now I'm going to talk about the kind of factors that the parole board would have used in deciding whether he was safe for relief. Now, understandably, there's going to be a lot of vitriol and hatred towards this man. There's going to be a strong voice of people saying that he shouldn't be released. I'm not going to talk about any of that. I'm going to keep it neutral and objective. So I'm intentionally steering away of my opinion about whether he should be released and the moralities behind it all. If you want to tell me your opinion, you're very welcome to. I'm interested in what you have to hear in the comments below. But similar to when I do my work in forensic psychiatry, when I give evidence as an expert witness, I take away my opinions and my emotions and I just give an objective opinion. I'd also say that I have written reports for the parole board. I've not been involved in the decision about whether somebody's been released, but instead somebody with a mental illness, say schizophrenia, bipolar, so not Colin Pitchfork, but other people. I've assessed whether that mental illness is being treated and whether it's being contained, whether there's risks because of that mental illness, and given my advice to parole boards. So Pitchfork was first up for parole in 2016, and according to reports, he'd made quite good progress in trying to convince the parole board that his risks had reduced. So he educated himself, he got a degree, he spent a lot of time translating written language into Braille for blind people. So on the surface, it looked like he was trying his best to do good to the community. So these things are heavily considered in a parole board hearing, as is a person's behaviour whilst they're in prison. So somebody that doesn't have adjudications, which means they don't get into trouble in prison, they're not fighting or arguing with the guards or the other inmates, and has done that consistently for years, is much more likely to get a positive outcome in a parole board hearing. Likewise, if they've done courses, if they've done educational courses, if they've taken medication, if it's been prescribed, all of those things are gonna make it more likely that they will be released. So what happened is he wasn't released in 2016, but a recommendation was made to move him to an open prison. So he went to an open prison where you're allowed day release. So you're still a prisoner, but you're allowed out for a particular purpose, like doing voluntary work, for example. Then he come back to the prison. That happened for a few years. Then he had another parole board hearing in 2018. Release was denied. And then just recently in June 2021, release was accepted. Now, when I say all this out loud, this very much reminds me of what happens in a psychiatric unit. So the consultant forensic psychiatrist has to decide when a patient is safe to be released into the community. Unlike a prison sentence, there is no minimum tariff. It could be a matter of years, could be decades. It all depends on the patient's mental health, their symptoms and their behavior. And exactly these kind of things are the same factors when I decide to release somebody. So leave is a big part of being in a psychiatric institution. Escorted leave with nurses initially, then unescorted leave down the line. And if patients can handle all of that without showing any boundary breaches, coming back on time, not drinking, not taking drugs, not getting into fights, after that's happened for a prolonged period, I would be inclined to look towards discharging them. So this decision was made by the Parole Board in June 2021, but unsurprisingly there was a big backlash. A lot of people spoke out about it. It became quite high profile in the media, and there was a strong voice to question this decision. So then it got referred to the Secretary of State, and at the time of making this video, the Secretary of State sent it for a judge to review, and the judge is going to come up with a decision very quickly, within the next 10 days of making this video, so it might even have been done by the time you're watching this. Please let me know your thoughts on what the final decision was in the comments section below. Okay, that's the end of my video. I just want to quickly introduce you to my channel. This is a Psych for Sore Minds. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders in prisons and in courts and in secure units. Got lots of stories that I share on this channel. I anonymise my patients. I talk about individual diagnoses. I look at infamous true crime, high profile cases, and I psychoanalyse and diagnose the perpetrators and sometimes the victims. There's something for everything on this channel. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you understand the ins and outs, a little bit of what goes into a parole board decision and why, despite how heinous somebody's crime can be, how that's actually not really that relevant a factor compared to their behaviour and their rehabilitation whilst they're in prison. So hopefully I've made some of those concepts a bit less nebulous. Until next time, stay 𝐸𝐵𝐸𝐺, and remember, I love you.